Hello everybody and welcome back to Card Games That Don't Suck, in which I am joined by Ben. Hello Ben.
Hello. Oh, we're shaking hands.
Shake
Very
hands.
formal.
Very formal. To talk about Eleusis. Now Eleusis was first published in the 50s in Scientific American. And you know why? It's because it's a game you actually know why, don't you?
Because it's scientific.
It's got some science. This is a game of deduction with a little bit of gambling, a lot of logic, a bit of tactics. It's also, for what it's worth, the most thematic card game that we have ever taught in this series. That's right, there's a whole story. There's God, there's scientists, there's prophets. It's pretty wild.
It's heavy going for a card game.
Yeah, the way that Eleusis works is that players will take turns being the dealer, but the dealer is also God, all right? So in our example, in this first round here, Ben will be God. Every other player is going to be dealt a whopping 14 cards. Now what this means is that to play Eleusis, you're actually going to need to shuffle 2 decks of cards together. It doesn't matter if they don't have the same back or even if the backs are radically different. The only other thing you're going to need is 4 chips of different colour, or 4 pennies, or 4 whatever. 4 things in your house. Cats, ants, olives. You get the idea. Now, once you've dealt out cards, you're also going to give a piece of paper to God and a pen. You ready, God?
Always.
Okay, so now God is going to write down the rules of this universe in which the rest of you are science, trying to figure out God's rule. So players, during play, are going to put out cards in a sequence. You're also going to take the top card of the deck and put it out as the first card, and then starting from God's left, players are going to look at their hand and secretly pick a card and then put it face up on the table. Now, God, who has written down their rule by this point, will tell you whether that card that you played is correct or incorrect. Now, we've got some examples of what this might look like. God might write down that cards in sequence have to alternate between red and black, or have a difference of at least 4, which this would be fine with because we're going from 10 to 5. It could also be as simple as just players aren't allowed to play spades, or what if you need the same suit 3 times, so hearts, 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 then whatever the next suit is, clubs, it would have to be clubs, clubs, clubs. You know what? You are limited only by your imagination.
And how much you hate your friends, depending on how complex you want to make it.
That's also true. We should stress here, if you write down a really, really devious, tricky rule, it's not that it breaks Eleusis, but it will potentially break your friends, certainly mean they like you a lot less. So just maybe until people have gotten to grips with Eleusis, write down something very, very simple. So let's imagine for this example that God wrote down a rule, which is that reds and blacks have to alternate. So if I'm the first player, and we've burned that card off the deck, I might try this card, and God would say,
that's okay.
hey, that's cool. That means that I've put one of my cards down. The objective in Eleusis is actually to get rid of your entire hand. Now, let's move on to this player, because play's going to go clockwise. Let's say this player puts down this card, and God says,
that's not okay.
Oh no! That means that you're going to take this card and slide it off to the side, okay? Additionally, the player who played something that was, in the words of God,
not okay.
Not okay. Is going to receive 2 more cards off the deck as a penalty, meaning that they're even further away from placing down their hand. Then the next player clockwise will play a card, but let's say this player has an inkling of what God's rule might be, in which case they don't have to play 1 card. They can actually play 1, 2, maybe 3 cards, all of which they have to play in sequence. So they're rushing out their hand. So let's say they say, God, is this okay? And they put out those 3 cards. God says,
I'd say that's not okay. Even if 1 or 2 of these cards was correct, if any of them are wrong, it's not okay. And all 3 get pushed aside.
Right. You're also going to take any cards that were in a set like that and put them off to the side in a clump so that players know that out of these 3, 1 of them was wrong in the sequence.
At least one of them.
At least one of them was wrong. So the good thing about playing multiple cards is potentially you can clear your hand quite quickly. The bad thing is if you're wrong even in the slightest way, you're not just going to get a penalty of 2 cards. You're going to get 2 cards for every card in the sequence you tried to slip past God. Look at that. Bam! That player's having a really, really bad time. Now, in doing this, there are some tweaks that I should explain. First off, another job that God has is every 10 cards that get played, so if we've got something like that, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in the sequence, God is going to place a chip out of their colour. Now, what these chips are is a timer, because once God has placed the 4th of their chips on the sequence, and this sequence will, by the way, grow to fill the entire table, once the 4th one is out, the game enters sudden death. God is really annoyed that none of you have figured out their rule. So when 40 cards are in the sequence, that means that anyone who plays a card incorrectly to the sequence, like let's imagine that we had all 4 chips out, which this isn't 40 cards obviously, but let's say it was. If I then play a card in sequence and God says...
That's not okay.
No! That means not only is that card a failure, but also I can put my hand down because I am out of this round. And then there are 2 ways that a round of Eleusis ends. One, as I said, which is when a player completely empties their hand. That's great for them. The other way is if all players are eliminated. Now I get to talk about something really fun. I'm going to talk about prophets, okay? Because a scientist, if they believe they fully understand God, can instead on their turn choose to become a prophet. That's right. We said that this game was dealing with some big themes, but it's going to get even weirder before we're over. So let's say I think I've figured out God's rule, okay? Let's say I've looked at this and gone, hey, it just seems to be going red, black, red, black. Oh my goodness, I figured it out. What I can then do is instead of playing a card, declare that I would like to become a prophet, okay? What we then do is we go clockwise around the table and all the other scientists get the opportunity to become prophet or pass. And if they choose to become prophet, they take it away from me. So if I say I want to become prophet, this player might pass, this player might say they want to become the prophet, then this player might say they want to become the prophet. Because they were the furthest clockwise from me, they get to be the prophet. Now, being the prophet, what that means is that you put your hand of cards down, you no longer play, it's a lot like being eliminated, but when another player, clockwise from them, plays a card into the sequence, it's not God that says yes or no, it's the prophet. But there's this lovely sort of hierarchical thing because the prophet will look at that and go, that's okay, and then look at God and go, was it okay? Okay, good. So the prophet takes on the role of God. Now, this is a high-risk maneuver, okay? Because if you are still prophet when a player runs out of cards or all the other players are eliminated, that's great. That's how you get the highest score in Eleusis, but we'll talk about scoring at the end of this video. However, if you are wrong, if someone puts a card in the sequence and you go, actually that's not okay, and then you look at God and God goes, it was okay, or vice versa. Basically, if you completely scotch the job of a prophet, then you are going to have to pick your hand back up. You're still playing. 2, you are no longer prophet. And 3, you receive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 penalty cards into your hand, and then play continues as normal. Another player can, of course, then just say, I would like to be the prophet, please, and try again, but you'd better be right when you do that. Another job that a prophet has is to do with this other color of chips. So ordinarily, remember, we've got these green chips, which are a timer showing when you're 10, 20, 30, and 40 cards through the game, at which point sudden death will begin. Once you have a prophet, the green chips are temporarily put to one side. From wherever the prophet begins, like if it began on this turn, you're going to mark that with a blue chip, and then play will continue as you are doing normally. But this time, the prophet is keeping track of the length of the game. So the blue chip shows when their profiting starts, and assuming they don't fail as a prophet, you're going to place that second blue chip when you're 10 cards on from the first one, and then 20, and then 30 cards on, which means it's a secondary timer within the game, basically. Ordinarily, after 40 cards, the game ends, but once you have a prophet, the game ends 30 cards from the beginning of the prophet's work. 2 more little things to play Eleusis. So first off, as was pointed out by cameraman Chris Batt, aren't you just going to reach the end of the table? The answer is hell yes you are, which is why players are going to probably start additional columns as you play. So as you play, the entire table will fill up. One final thing, and I think that's quite interesting about Eleusis, is that hand of cards you've got is really quite limiting. You might find yourself wanting to do certain kinds of scientific experiments to deduce God's rule, when actually you just don't have the numbers for it. Which makes the game interesting, but it can sometimes mean that you think you know what the rule is. Like here, I might think that I have to play a red, but I don't have a red in my hand. If you think you cannot obey God's rule, you can instead on your turn, when it's your turn to play a card, declare no play, which is where you go, I don't think I can play anything. You reveal your entire hand, and God, or the prophet if there is one, will look at your hand. If you are correct that you cannot play a card, you junk your whole hand and are going to get dealt a new hand with 4 cards less than the old one, which is amazing. However, if you reveal your card and you could have played, God or the prophet will take that card you could have played from your hand, put it in the row, and then you will receive a penalty card. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 penalty cards, I'm sorry, and then that will join your hand, and that's your penalty for being a doofus.
There's a fantastic moment of going, God, I don't know what to do. And God goes, you do this. That's what you do.
It's a very weird take on theology, isn't it? That God knows exactly how you should all be living, but isn't going to tell.
He'll only let you know when you go wrong, not when you go right.
So that's Eleusis. Now we're going to get on to scoring. And often we like to try and teach card games that don't suck in a way that you guys can internalize. Instead, I think we're just going to cut to a title card, and I'm going to read this off, and then you can use it when you're playing Eleusis, because... Are you joking? This is nuts. First, find the high count, the largest number of cards held by any player, including the prophet. Everyone except the dealer gets points equal to the high count minus the number of cards in their hand. Then, anyone except the dealer with no cards gets 4 points. Then, a true prophet, which is anyone who's still the prophet at the end of the round, additionally gets 1 point for each correct card and 2 points for each wrong card played after they became prophet. 4. God's score is the smaller of either A, the highest player's score, or B, twice the number of cards played before the true prophet started. 5. If you stop playing Eleusis early, anyone who hasn't yet been God gets 10 extra points. 6. The person with the largest number of points wins. And that's Eleusis. There's your game of deduction and gods and prophets and bluffing.
It's really weird sitting back as God and going, okay, they've got this. They very clearly know what they're doing. And then someone plays a card and you just think, what on earth? And then you say no, and then they pull it back and they're like, well, why wasn't that the pattern? No matter what pattern you select, even this pattern, which seems super simple looking at it, when you're a player on the other side of that, you see all sorts of patterns and go, oh, it's going up and down, and then it's clubs, and there's nothing like that.
That's my absolute favourite, is like thinking the puzzle's really complicated and then looking down and just being like, oh my God, as you realise it's actually just like club, spade, club, or whatever.
The call was coming from inside the house.
Yeah, you are overthinking this drastically. Honestly, I don't often like a lot of these games where a player comes up with a rule and then everyone else has to try and follow it. But I think the reason I love Eleusis, and so many people do as well, because this game's been being played for like 50 years, is that it's not just a game of deduction, but a game where when you think you know it, you can really gamble, right? Because you can play 4 cards in one go if you think you've got it, even though the penalty is 8 if you're wrong even in the slightest. And just that option of like, if I say I want to become prophet, that's such an interesting decision for all the other players, because they probably think they might know what the clue is. But are they sure enough to become prophet? And then watching false prophets fail, like there's a lot of really magnificent moments in this game.
And it genuinely captures that theme of scientific experiments. It's every card you play is called an experiment. So you say, I'm going to make an experiment that does this. But when you really start to get your head around it, you deliberately play the cards you don't think it is to eliminate possibilities. So then the other players, they do go with the obvious option, which makes being a prophet or just burning through your hand much easier.
Oh, it's fascinating. Or like watching other players and wanting them to play cards that you think will probably be wrong, because then they get the penalty and you can just sit back playing nice cards. It's like a really clean combination of like sort of fun game to teach you about science and experimentation and just like a rock solid card game.
Yeah, definitely. And the asymmetrical side is nicely balanced by the fact God scores based on how well other players do, and obviously you all get turns to play God.
It's great.
In all senses of the term.
yeah. But this is also this series, Card Games That Don't Suck. It's me loving it the most because I haven't played a board game or card game you can buy that's quite like this.
That's very true, and you can play many other games with a deck of cards.
Yeah, absolutely.
Such as other card games that don't suck.
Hey, if you've enjoyed this series, why not subscribe to the playlist? Thank you very much, everybody. This has been another card game that doesn't suck.